You're listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast, presented by Sierra Club Angeles Chapter and Stranded Astronaut Productions. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts, we cover the stories of the climate crisis, from celebrating the wins to breaking down our fears, all while sharing collective hopes for the future. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and this week, for our final episode of the season, we're talking about the future and how we can use action and imagination to envision and create a greener planet. All around us, there are people and organizations taking on the difficult but important task of confronting the climate crisis. When doom and gloom permeates our news feeds, collective action can empower us to work and dream towards the hope we need. Many groups are already hard at work, fighting for and implementing necessary changes, like the transition to clean energy. In order to confront the climate crisis, we need to break our reliance on fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. These fossil fuels contribute 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, indisputably driving climate change. They also power our homes, our cities, our cars. They're deeply woven into the current way of life. We know fossil fuels are harming us and the Earth, and yet policies to confront this issue have been slow, in many ways inhibited by the marketing and lobbying tactics of the fossil fuel industry. If we're searching for a healthy future for people and planet, clean, renewable energy is the way. But before we move towards progress, we need to be able to envision the world that we can create. When you think about the future, what do you see? What do you imagine? Amidst the popular media depiction of a dystopian future landscape, how can these visions empower us to fight for a more resilient world? Tory, the climate fiction creative manager at the independent media organization Grist, is helping provide a space for these questions and visions to exist. At first, though, the idea of exploring and even publishing speculative climate fiction was a novel concept for the news organization.
I'd say that this all started from a hunch. Grist is a magazine, an online magazine, an independent nonprofit organization that's been around. Actually, it's our 25th year this year. And so we've been reporting on the climate for that long. And really, we weren't focused on fiction or envisioning futures. I mean, it's a news organization. So the primary focus is to educate people and give them the information that they need.
According to Tory, about 5 years ago, the founder of Grist created the institution Fix, which would focus on highlighting what the group calls fixers, people who are working to solve the climate crisis today. During this creation process, Grist members and fixers were put into a creative lab retreat, where a visioning session led to the idea of incorporating climate fiction at Grist.
We weren't really focused on the news cycle. We were very much focused on, this kind of like, what does the future of our world look like? I was also very tied to the idea that we need to get things done now. I wanted to push for policy or get the news out there that would get people kind of energized and activated. But instead, I decided to bring a group of people together to ideate on what climate fiction would look like at Grist. And the way that we understood or tried to figure out what climate fiction would be at Grist was to bring together 25 people and play a game. We created this game called Imagine 2200, and it was the exercise that I've done and now that we call the Envisioning Better Climate Worlds. And we built the game, and it's like a game, but also a way to vision the future. It has a timeline. It asks people to dream about the future that they want, a future that's clean, green, and just. And so we played that game with all these thought leaders and activists and politicians and, kelp farmers, you name it, a whole cross-section of people from the climate kind of space.
The game creates a timeline on the wall, noting milestone years like 2030 and 2050 that already have climate goals attributed to them, and then continues on to 2075, 2100, 2150, and so on, asking people to think past the policies in place today to envision the changes that could come tomorrow. By investing in people from all sectors of the climate space, from land stewards to climate advocates, Tory found how intersectional climate fiction could be.
What I realized is that if I had brought climate fiction to Grist without that input, without the kind of environmental justice leaders saying, hey, if you're going to do climate fiction, you better be thinking about the land back movement. You better be thinking about reparations. Like, you know, I knew about those things, but I didn't have people telling me, no, you have to do climate fiction with and think about these things and have them on the table. It kind of blew my mind. I was just like, wow, this kind of visioning session where you allow other people to dream into a space collectively opens up a lot of different options for you.
I had the pleasure of being in one of the visioning sessions at the Aspen Ideas Climate Conference last year. And as we were, kind of going down the timeline, it started getting a little bit harder to think about ideas. I had so many ideas for 2025, for 2030, for 2050. And then you said 2100. And I went, I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how we get there yet. But I do think that a lot of the programs, are trying to instill this hope in being able to imagine that future as not dystopian, as what if we do get it right? What if we win? Imagining how we can create livable futures is vital for creating tangible goals in the collective consciousness of political activists and progressive politics. These goals can provide a sense of meaning and purpose for those trying to take the actions necessary to reinvent the world in an image of abundance, equity, and prosperity. In order to push for that more aggressive action, grassroots climate organizations are harnessing the power of people to create change. The Sunrise Movement, a youth-led organization driving political action on climate, is bringing together young people to train them on climate issues and policy.
I joined Sunrise when I was 19 years old. I was a volunteer at first, and I described joining Sunrise a lot like falling in love.
That's Shiney-Ajay, executive director of the Sunrise Movement, who's grown alongside the organization as it's become an influential political power.
I remember going into my first Sunrise training and just being so taken with the way that for the first time I felt like people were talking about climate solutions on the scale of the problem. And that was so exciting to me to think about, okay, finally there are some people who are thinking about overhauling our society to stop the climate crisis.
Aru began volunteering all the time with Sunrise Movement, starting a hub or an organized place to take action at her school and in her hometown. She quickly began leading trainings while still in college, and eventually became the executive director at just 25 years old. Since its start in 2017, Sunrise Movement has hosted hundreds of these hubs across the US and played a major role in passing climate change legislation.
I think that being in Sunrise has been one of the most empowering experiences that I've had in my life, and I think it's truly transformative for anyone to be in a social movement. So much in life tells us that we are powerless, that everyday people can't make change. We talk about climate change and climate politics as if the politics are the thing that's immutable and unchangeable, as opposed to the fact that actually the climate science is the thing that is hurtling down one path, and the politics are the things we can change if people are able to have courage and change them. And I think that's very relevant in this moment as well, to not just treat moments as if they're static or as if we don't have power.
Bringing community voices into the transition towards clean energy is integral to an environmental justice framework, one that empowers people to be a part of the conversation and the change happening in their own communities. It also takes a policy lens to tackle these larger infrastructure changes. This is an avenue Sunrise Movement has found great success in by securing a seat at the political table. Aru says that when they're approaching campaigns at Sunrise Movement, there are 3 types of power they tend to focus on.
The way that we think about a lot of our campaigning, we talk about 3 basically types of power. We talk about people power, political power, and then we talk about something called political alignments, or sometimes we describe it as changing the common sense. A lot of the times we mobilize in the streets, and part of what Sunrise did was make sure that we were really translating that into the political realm. And that means both like showing up at your Congress people's offices, but it also means telling the story of climate being a political winner. We talk about politicians as weather vanes a lot of the time. Like, it's not about whether they're good or whether they're bad. They will go where the public is, and your job is to shape where the public is and make sure they know where the public is so they want to follow you. So what we did at Sunrise, we really tried to tell the story of climate being a political winner, that it could get you more union support, that it could get you more youth support, and that is a lot of what made like Joe Biden, who did not start out as a climate champion by any means whatsoever, decide to say, okay, actually, I'm going to make climate a cornerstone of my agenda and of my presidency.
Under the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. To date, it's the largest climate bill in U.S. history. It provides subsidies and grants towards clean energy and clean infrastructure, creates new clean energy jobs, and invests in a future built on sustainable materials and renewable energy sources. While it's far from the request Sunrise Movement members asked for, and their campaign for a Green New Deal, it did serve as proof that climate organizers could make real change through pressure and policy.
That's part of the building political power and also shaping the common sense of the country, saying, actually, it is common sense that we should address the climate crisis. It is common sense that our lives could be better. And then the other thing I'd say in terms of people power is we talk a lot about escalated action in Sunrise. People aren't going to get things just by asking nicely. We should call our senators and we should go send them letters, but to win the IRA, people went on a hunger strike. People trekked across California and the Gulf South and Pennsylvania. People blockaded all entrances of the White House. This wasn't just a did you call your congressperson win. It was a win that came from the blood, sweat, and tears of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who tried everything that they could to actually win this fight. I think especially, again, in this political moment, we are not going to see our wins just from asking nicely. It is going to take sometimes breaking the rules, sometimes doing what we wouldn't usually expect ourselves to do in order to actually stand up for the future we deserve.
Outside of defining and imagining what the future should look like, and beyond the struggle to sway a public opinion towards that vision, what does the doing actually look like? What are those next steps once the ideas are had and the terms are set? For the Sierra Club, that next step is the just transition away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy across the U.S. Julia Dowell, a Sierra Club senior campaign organizer, is working on the campaign to decarbonize California's electric grid.
I work on a statewide campaign advocating to shut down the state's gas plants, over half of which are in environmental justice communities, and to build out clean energy to replace these gas plants. So the ultimate goal of the campaign is to reach 100% clean energy in a way that is most just and equitable for California. I would say California is leading in a lot of clean energy development across the country. And so the state does have a goal of reaching 100% clean energy by 2045. So that gives us about 20 years to build out precedent-setting levels of clean energy. And what we really want to see is making sure that as we're building out this clean energy, we're shutting down gas plants and stopping the overburdening of pollution in frontline communities.
So with these goals in mind, are we meeting where we need to be for a clean energy future?
We are maybe not on track, but we are on a path to get there. We are at about 40%, just under 40% of California's energy coming from renewable sources. We still get about 35% of our electricity today from gas plants. So that's quite a bit that we need to replace. And also part of this larger 100% goal, the state set a goal of reaching 60% renewable energy by 2030. So I think that kind of sets us up for needing to ramp things up pretty quickly. We met a milestone last year of 100 days during the year were met with clean energy meeting our demand at some point during that day. Of course, that doesn't mean we're meeting all of our demand for an entire day, but that's a huge milestone, and it shows that California can achieve its clean energy goals. We just really need to continue on the path forward and actually do that more aggressively than we have thus far.
With Sierra Club's Clean Electricity campaign, Julia partners with environmental justice groups who are working on the ground right now to actualize a cleaner future by shutting down power plants and switching to renewable energy sources, all while centering the needs of the communities most impacted.
Organizing is at the heart of this work and this movement. And so I want to say that Sierra Club is really focused on how do we engage community and then organize community to support clean energy projects, to advocate for shutting down fossil fuels. And so our state and local agencies really need to hear that community members want clean energy and want to retire fossil fuels. I think envisioning the pathways to actually getting to clean energy and actually hearing that that's what communities want is critical to this specific fight that we're in. We need the people power, the community voices behind this fight to really move our decision makers, not only legislators, but our public utilities commissioners that are making a lot of these energy decisions for the entire state. I kind of see two sides of the fight that we're currently in. And one side is shutting down the bad, shutting down fossil fuels. And I think that's true for a lot of us in this space. That's the fight we're fighting and the fight we've been fighting. And then the other side of that is how do we build the good, and how do we also build the good in a way that is different from the extractive energy economies of the past. So in terms of the work for shutting down gas plants, we are working with a lot of environmental justice partners across the state. We really take the lead from our EJ partners in terms of which gas plants we need to prioritize advocacy around. And of course, we want to shut down all gas plants, but we also know that these communities have been overburdened for a long time. And so we want to prioritize advocating for the shutdown of the dirtiest gas plants that have been plaguing environmental justice communities first.
The issue of powering down gas plants is not just related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. These industries are harming communities today through toxic emissions.
We released a report in December that looked at 9 of the dirtiest gas plants across the state that are in environmental justice communities. And we looked at NOx emissions, which are harmful pollutants that really impact respiratory health. And we looked at how those NOx emissions are specifically terrible, even compared to other gas plants in the state, and how they're plaguing communities. It would seem like maybe all gas plants are created equally, but that's not always the case. So there's different types of gas plants, and some of them serve our base load, which basically means they're running most of the time. They maybe aren't generating too much electricity, but they're not going on and off. So they're just kind of steadily chugging along. The other types of plants are called peaker plants, and those are used to meet our highest demand. So typically between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., we see this spike in energy demand. And that's because everyone got home and they're doing their laundry and they're running their dishwasher and everyone's turning on their lights. It's getting dark outside. This happens to also coincide with when we have usually the least renewable energy available. Our sun is starting to set. And so what happens is around this time, we see gas plants being turned online, in particular peaker plants. And the interesting thing about gas plants is they have pollution control technology, but when you first turn them on and first turn them off, that technology is not working.
Because the pollution control technology that Julia mentions doesn't work when the plants turn on and off, these peaker plants are especially toxic to communities, making them a prioritized target for decarbonization campaigners.
We're trying to uplift what are the most harms and how do we prioritize minimizing those harms first. And then, our next step would be combating the rest of the gas plants and shutting those down.
Alongside shutting down these gas plants, the campaign is also pushing for the necessary transition to clean, renewable energy sources, like solar, wind, and battery storage.
As a statewide campaign, I try to work with our different community members and our different chapters to support specific clean energy projects that are, responsibly sited and that are in areas that we want to see clean energy developed and are done in a way that provide, good union jobs and have the least harm to our wild spaces and things like that. And so we also work across campaigns. We work with our conservation campaigns to make sure we're really doing clean energy right. We know we need to get rid of fossil fuels. We know we need to build out clean energy, but how do we do this in the best, most just and equitable way possible?
When taking these massive steps towards a clean energy transition, it has to be done with a deep understanding of intersectionality. Environmental justice, biodiversity, and public safety will all need to weave together in the collective fight for a livable future. These necessary pieces, the people power and tangible campaigns, rely on asking ourselves what the best possible future could be. Visioning workshops at Grist are helping organizers dare to imagine the world that we can build. For Grist, these workshops have expanded even further into a climate fiction contest, Imagine 2200, which asks writers to craft stories centered around their concept of just, equitable worlds set centuries in the future.
So far, over the course of 5 years, we've gotten 4,500 to 600 stories. So people are really envisioning these really beautiful worlds in the world that they would like. There's a lot of dystopian fiction and storytelling out there, and not just the United States, but kind of globally. We're addicted to it. There's nothing wrong with dystopian stories. They are a clarion call for what we don't want. But I think what we don't have is these stories of abundance and when we get it right. And I think we need a lot more visions of that world that we actually want.
When we're thinking about the future, people can tend to lean towards tech-based solutions, especially when it comes to fictional storytelling. The iconic 1980s film Back to the Future predicted flying cars, hoverboards, and holographic sharks for the far-off year of 2015. Today, concepts like geoengineering, restarting nuclear plants, and the terraforming of a certain red planet commonly find their way into the discussion of climate solutions. But these sorts of technocratic, idealized solutions don't always serve the intersectional requirements for a world in harmony with nature.
Because climate fiction is kind of a offshoot of science fiction, we definitely get a lot of tech solutions. But because of the way that we design the project and what we're asking for, those stories don't end up being the ones that we publish. Certainly they have tech in the stories, but we're kind of interested in how people are in right relationship with nature, how people are in right relationship with each other. So you'll often find a story where people are just working out how they live and be with each other. How do we cook this meal together? How do we live with each other? How do we express gratitude for the earth? One of the things that we've really pushed is that we want culturally authentic stories, and we want stories that have intersectional characters. Some of them are tech driven, some of them about our relationship with the land and each other. But at the heart of a really good imagined story is the hope. For us, the thing that we're always chasing is a really good story. I think when it works really well is when there's a balance of climate solutions. It's talking about things that you weren't aware of. One of the biggest things that we've been doing that I'm excited about is that we've been asking people, if you think of yourself as a mystery writer, if you think of yourself as a romance writer or an adventure writer or a fast-paced suspense writer, why don't you weave some climate fiction in there, or some climate themes or plot or narrative, so that your audience, they see that their world is changing and they want that. Chosen family is a huge theme. Family is a huge theme. And trying to figure out what do we do when someone new comes into our community and how we invite them and treat them. Because we all know that there's going to be a lot more people moving about this planet because of the climate crisis. People on the front lines who are displaced. And we want to depict stories where people are welcoming and who are there to greet folks and integrate them into our society and not push them away.
The visioning framework has definitely continued to permeate our conversation. It is a really wonderful way of being able to think about climate. And I have seen love and care be really strategic frameworks for how we get people involved, how we start to think about complex environmental issues on a more personal and individual level to create collective action. Because once we start talking about, this climate disaster could impact your loved ones, this public health issue of, gas plants or oil operations in your neighborhood could give your family cancer. These are things that are direct impacts that could happen today because of the way that we are working and not confronting the climate crisis and not changing our ways towards clean energy. So by being able to envision this future where we do a lot of that, it makes sense that romance, that love would be a common way of addressing that and understanding that vision.
One of the things that I've noticed is that, some folks might have a vision that's far-flung in the future. Like, when we do the collective visioning session, somebody will put on the sticky pad, reparations will happen in 2150. And then somebody else will, like, when we're having our discussion, goes, wait, why can't that happen in 2040? Like, just because you dreamed it and thought about it at this particular time, that's just like a way for us to kind of get people's mind going and get the thoughts out of their head onto paper. But it doesn't mean any of these far-flung ideas have to happen in 200 years from now.
In the framework of visioning these futures to harness our people power, create real change, and dream of this collective future, I asked Julia, Aru, and Tory, what does 2100 look like to you?
It's so refreshing to think of like 2100, 2200 and be envisioning this future, because I'll just say in the work I do, I'm constantly looking at like, okay, 2100, the sea level is going to rise this much and the temperature is going to be this, and how are we going to mitigate climate impacts? And so just hearing this like envisioning is such a different perspective that like I really hadn't thought about in a very long time. This transition to clean energy can really give us and is giving us an opportunity to do things differently rather than, where my mindset has been, which has been, in deficit, and how we need to do this or we're going to be in a disaster zone. And I think 2100, if we're successful and, we can really successfully do this transition in the way we want to achieve a clean, reliable grid. In terms of the energy system, it's one without fossil fuels, first and foremost. It's one where everyone has access to clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. And this energy mix looks like a combination of rooftop solar and storage on homes and businesses, energy efficiency programs that help customers decrease their energy usage, solar and wind projects that can bring clean energy into our communities, batteries that are needed to help us store this energy. Would love to see offshore wind built out in California that provides reliable energy at a really large scale. And even things like load shifting. So we're mobilizing in a way where we're using the most energy when we have the most clean energy available. And renewable energy is plentiful. And then because of this clean energy transition, the future to me would look like fewer asthma attacks and hospital trips, increased energy reliability for folks in emergency situations, more good union jobs in the clean energy space, and ultimately curbing the impacts of climate change because we're emitting fewer greenhouse gases. So that's the clean energy future I envision.
Young people in particular, are so in a mode of we can't change anything because they haven't been offered a vision of actually building a better future, that it really motivates a lot of people to stay at home or to disengage from the political process. So I think vision is a huge part of saying, actually, like, your life doesn't have to be squeezing things to be able to like make rent and working 2 jobs or working a job you really don't like and you feel like a cog, that your life could be better and fuller and you could be happy and have a fulfilled life. So I think that's a huge part of it. One of the most intuitive ways I've heard environmental justice and climate justice talked about is, you know, the climate crisis is going to change everything about our world and our society, and everything will have to change. So why don't we change it for the better for people? Which is just, it makes it so obvious, but it helps a lot. And I think to what you were saying, Tory, reminds me a lot of that, of like, yeah, actually, we're going to keep being humans living our daily lives. And what would it look like for those to just be happier and brighter? You know, Sunrise's campaigns on the Green New Deal, so that's the framework that guides a lot of my answer here. I think about little things. I think about like waking up in the morning and maybe making yourself breakfast with fresh, healthy food. I think that the power that's needed to take on the fossil fuel industry is also the power that's needed to take on a lot of other corporations that make our life really bad in many ways. So maybe the food is locally grown or locally sourced. It makes you feel good. And maybe you go outside to work and you catch the bus and maybe you make eye contact with the people on the bus instead of just being glued to your phone all the time. Because when you're not stressed about everything in your life, you want to connect with other people. And it's like little things like that that I think about, you know, and the air is cleaner, the water is cleaner. But also, I truly believe we can be a lot happier that, you know, 60, 70 years of corporate capture of our government has turned us against each other and made our lives miserable in so many ways. That's what the right has captured, that anger, that fear. And instead, we could turn it into hope for something better. So yeah, I think about clean energy, but I also think about lives that are like full of joy and laughter and family and friends.
I come from the health space, so I'm always thinking about people's health. And I definitely think that, you know, people are living healthy lives, and they're living healthy lives because the air is cleaner, the water is cleaner, there's no fossil fuel being burned, and we're using renewable energy. And people aren't worried or burdened by the kind of anxiety that comes from the climate crisis, and then also from not being able to afford your healthcare bill. So for me, like, those two things are really tied together, because the public health, like, I got into this because I was very much interested in people's public health and still am. And I saw the climate crisis as a huge, like, societal wide public health issue, or even global. So I really focus on that part. And then I really dig in what Aru said about, like, just being able to, like, be with each other. Like, the time spent trying to pay for that healthcare bill or trying to pay for the rent, I really wish we could, as humans, have time to kind of be with each other, create, build, and just, you know, break bread with each other and, like, experience the joy that is being human. So for me, those things are really intertwined, and that's what I think 2100 would look like if we get it right.
Working on the ground to shift away from fossil fuels, catalyzing the people power that lives within all of us, and remembering to leave room for dreaming of a future where we win. It all starts with an action, a conversation, a connection. This future, a world where everyone has access to clean air, clean water, natural spaces, and healthy, happy lives. It's possible. We're in this fight together, and we know what it takes to get it right, to transition away from fossil fuels, to take care of one another, and to win.
Hi, it's Megan from the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, here with your weekly call to action. We've reached the end of our first season, and our final episode is all about imagining the future. Over the past 8 weeks, we hope our conversations have inspired you to imagine a better future and to dream big about what's possible. There's so much that we can achieve together. Help us build a more sustainable world by supporting the Angeles chapter today. Visit sc.org/AngelusVision to contribute to the important work we do every day and to help make Season 2 of the Climate Dispatch a reality. That's sc.org/AngelusVision. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast. We appreciate all of you who have tuned in for Season 1 and invited us into your commutes, your homes, and your headphones. Until next time, I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and playing us into our collective vision of the future is singer-songwriter and guitarist Donald Beeman with his song, Old Universe.
Drawn by the light through an aimless day, knowing the night is never far away. When in your eyes I see the curve of the earth and the sun as it was in the old universe. At the edge of the light, crowned by the shade of the sun through the leaves and the gentle pattern they had made. When over your shoulder I see the curve of the earth and the sun going down in the old in your eyes, I see the curve of the earth and the sun as it was in the old universe.
The Climate Dispatch is a production of Stranded Astronaut and the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, produced by myself, Tay Jeanette, Meg Pruce, and Megan Spatz. Audio engineering and editing by Maxfield Biggs, original theme music and score by Phil Hamilton, and graphics by Cirrus Marlo Sama.